Welcome to the Lean Solutions Podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders by helping you improve performance using process improvement solutions with bottom line results. My name is Patrick Adams, and this season I'll be joined by three other amazing hosts, including Catherine McDonald from Ireland, Andy Olrich from Australia, and Shayne Daughenbaugh from the United States. Join us as we bring you guests and experiences of lean practitioners from all over the world.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast, led by your host, Shayne Daughenbaugh, and myself, Andy Olrich. How's it going, Shayne?
It's going well, sir. Thank you very much. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Yeah, thank you very much.
I got a question for you here at the beginning of the year. You know, we're in March. We're, the first quarter still. What is a goal you have planned that you plan to accomplish this year? And then the follow-up question to that is, how are you visually tracking that goal?
Okay. So I have a big goal, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later on, but I have a goal to attend and present at the Lean Solutions Summit in this September in Michigan. Okay, so there's a bit of a cross promo there, but it's a real thing. It's a real goal. So for me down here in Australia, there's a little bit of planning required and all of the family and life things around it to get me on the plane and over there. So it's a good question about the visualization. So I actually have a process where I track all of my key tasks and work. And it's very visual. I'm a visual person. So really I start with a high level goal in mind, and that goes up on the wall. And then I break that down into little subtasks to help me.
Yeah.
You got to take it out a bite at a time. And then as I do those, I move them from one column across. It's a very visual process where I take a little card basically and go from one place across to do, then doing. So I'm in the process of doing some things now, and then come September, it'll be in the done column. So that's a very visual system I use for how I keep myself on track and reach that goal. And
awesome.
Drop it in now. What's it called, Shayne?
It's called Kanban is my understanding that's what that's called. And so I came across or was given this very fancy, or I should say very visual word picture. So like a finely tuned symphony orchestrating productivity, Kanban transcends traditional manufacturing methods, introducing a visual and dynamic system that dances with precision through the production process. I love these words. Kanban isn't just a method, it's a choreography of productivity, transforming the manufacturing landscape into finely tuned performance of excellence. Now, here's the kicker. But amidst this dance of efficiency, some voices still question, does Kanban suck? I gotta, throw it back to you, Andy. Is that something that you've come across and seen or heard?
When, like many things in Lean, when not used within the spirit or as per how it was intended. So I don't think it sucks. It keeps me moving and humming, very simply, very visual. But we're not going to talk too much about it because we've got a fantastic guest here today who's going to
please tell us about it.
A lot of that for us, Steve Ansuini. So Steve is the dynamic owner of the Centre for Employee Development, LLC, founded in 2007. So specializing in lean manufacturing, transactional lean, healthcare lean, maintenance and soft skills training. He has collaborated with Fortune 100 companies and achieving significant reductions in safety incidents, inventory and operational costs. So keyword there, again, it's not just manufacturing. Okay, this is where it's happening everywhere. So Steve is beyond his business pursuits. He's partnered with Purdue University to establish and operate a lean environment simulator, or LESS, since 2015. And look, this is just one of 6 units available to the public globally. And with the rich background, including 3 years at Toyota Engineering and Manufacturing of North America and 17 years at Toyota Motor Manufacturing, Kentucky, he brings an absolute wealth of expertise from his 10-year stints at Mack Trucks and the US Marine Corps. Wow. Without further ado, hey, Steve, welcome to the show.
Steve, we are happy to have you here. Thank you so much for stepping out of the classroom and into the podcast here, so to speak.
Yeah, my
Can
pleasure.
you give us a little bit of on your background? Like Andy just read a great summary of all kinds of things. 7 years here, 17 years here, 3 years here, just all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I started with 10 years in the Marine Corps. So I was given a lot of good discipline, direction, and development in my younger years, which was helpful. And then I went to work with Mack Trucks for 10 years. And so they're world known for their durability and their longevity of the product. And then I joined Toyota and spent a little over 20 years with Toyota, 17 at the manufacturing in Kentucky. And that was still my home base, but I was in North America for the last 3 years. I was with Toyota. And so since then, I've worked with large, like Caterpillar was my largest manufacturing customer. Wells Fargo was my largest service organization, and worked with several hospitals and clinics, insurance companies, car rental agencies, Boeing, so there's just a plethora of opportunities that I've had to develop in Lean because I did get boot camp from Toyota for 20 years. But,
Right.
I feel like I'm still learning. And I think anyone who is truly doing Lean should feel like they've never arrived, that they're still learning and developing.
That's great. Yeah.
That's excellent. Yeah.
As you said, Shayne, there was a lot in there and more, Steve, around your history and background. So strap yourselves in, listeners. We have got someone very, very skilled and knowledgeable on all things Lean, let alone what we're going to focus on a bit today. So thanks again for your time, Steve. And this is going to be great. So I'll jump in all of that diverse experience, health, manufacturing, working for all those different companies. When it comes to Lean and implementing some processes and methodologies, what do you find when that's at initial kickoff point? When a company is wanting to start Lean and they bring you in and say, hey, I've seen this stuff, we want to do it. Where do you find there's the first hurdle to get over?
Yeah, it is always a cultural hurdle. I don't believe I've been in any company that culture has not been the biggest obstacle. People have a tendency to feel comfortable with the way they've done things for 20, 30, 40 years sometimes, and they feel like it's worked for them, and it may have, and they don't want to really look at changing because we have a tendency to resist change. And so getting over that cultural hurdle, I have found very effective ways of doing it, and you give them some early wins that are like low-hanging fruit. And of that, you would have things like 5S and continuous improvement and Kanban systems. And they start seeing the value of these systems, and then
Sure.
they get on board pretty quick. And so without fail, it seems like the change does take about 3 to 5 years, but it is something that must not be rushed. If you ever go to a company and they said, well, if you had been here 3 years ago, you would have said this was a picture of Lean, but we're really doing bad now. And what that tells me is someone came in as a trainer or consultant and gave them all these tools and launched all these things, but the people didn't understand them. And as the consultant left, things kind of go back to the way they were because that's what they're most comfortable with, and they don't understand why they were doing it differently. And so the whole thing with culture is paramount, and we need to start with leadership.
Right. So Steve, a question that comes to mind, and maybe Andy, you may be thinking similarly, but you're telling me culture 3 to 5 years, that's a long commitment. So
Yes,
so what is going to keep me motivated to, if I'm the owner of a company or, executives in a company, what is going to keep us motivated to keep plowing ahead, to keep working ahead along the way? What are some of the wins that we're going to see? Or maybe you can even share like a story of an initiative that did work and that shifted the culture dramatically.
Yes. Working with a large manufacturer, we were charged with working in 3 different functional areas, and we were given one team in each of those areas. And so with those teams, what we did was we did some training with them and helped them understand things like 5S and Kanban, and problem solving, and gave them the rudimentary, and then coached them through an actual problem that they were experiencing. And in one area, we were required to change to another team because of business needs. The other team wasn't available that we were initially given. And so we had to move on to another team, and then a third team, maybe within a month and a half. And so it was a little frustrating for us, but to me, it was a very powerful message, because I had folks from the very first team that I worked with come to me off the clock, basically, and said, hey, I'm doing this, and I found that this was working well, but I'm not quite sure what to do next. And so giving them early wins in these areas can be very powerful.
So what, to tie into this Kanban thing with that question we just asked, because you mentioned Kanban, what's an example, for those that are, our listeners that may not really understand or have kind of a vague idea of what Kanban is. In this particular instance, what did the Kanban look like for that particular, that particular company?
They were working with what we call Yamazumi charts, which, Andy, sounds a little similar to what you're talking about and how you organize your information. But they weren't, and they were working with various other tools, but they weren't reaching success. And that's why they brought us in. And we were there to help make that connection. And as we introduced it and explained the why, people had a tendency to be more understanding and willing. And my approach to almost everything is say, okay, let's agree to do a pilot. If it doesn't work, we'll throw it out.
Sure. Right.
And I know it's going to work, but I want to give them that out, because then they don't feel like they're going to have to do this for the rest of their life if it's not something they like, And so with one activity around Kanban, we were able to produce a $12 billion savings for a company in a 2-year project.
I mean, that's okay, I guess.
Yeah. Is that all, Steve? Oh,
yeah. Is that all?
And
wow.
In my experience, the percentages of savings are almost consistent. You could pretty much say you're going to get 10% savings with labor, you're going to get a 15% savings with inventory. But when you work with large manufacturing, that's when it comes to $12 billion, But looking on a smaller scale, I mean, that was a huge organization with 57,000 employees, But when you look on a smaller scale, I worked with a company that had 40 employees and worked with him for 3 years. And Kanban was definitely part of that structural change that we were making. And he told me this past January that he was up 419% net profits in that 3-year period of time. And so for a small business, that can mean a huge change in their lifestyle.
Yeah, that's a fantastic example. One of the things I'll just pick up on is, you mentioned about the Yamazumi chart. And so, when people hear the word Kanban, and especially with the Agile and the digital and the Scrums of the world, there's a lot of focus, and they have the artifacts around the Kanban board. But there's also there's different iterations within that can introduce some unnecessary complexity, but also when we talk about in the inventory management space, so on the assembly line, for example, with your supply and withdrawal Kanban. So it's something that, again, with a lot of lean tools, depending on sort of where you've been and what they use, they may call them certain things or different flavors. If you were to try and really describe to somebody simplistically about maybe the 3 or 4 different types of Kanban, or even 2, whatever you like, could you give us a bit of an elevator pitch on that?
Yeah, I think most people think of Kanban from a production side, and that would be a production instruction Kanban, but the other would be a parts withdrawal Kanban. So those are 2 distinct Kanbans, and each of those have 2 subsets. So if you look at a production Kanban, you're looking at intra-process Kanban and signal Kanban. And they're used for different things, but when I talk with people about this and show them these tools, I tell them, you don't need to call it that. You want to use language that your culture is accustomed to, because that's going to help move the culture along faster. So when you get to the parts withdrawal Kanban, you have inter-process and supplier Kanban. And so an organization has to start in-house before they can start having their suppliers use Kanban, and they have to understand it. And so just starting to use a basic production instruction Kanban, I take the Kanban card out of the tote or the box and put it in the Kanban mail slot before I take the first part out of the box or the tote. And then I start pulling it. The way the system is filled is it's designed that there will not be an opportunity to run out of parts before you get your delivery, because they take into consideration how long does it take for the Kanban to get from your mailbox to logistics, and how long it takes them to pull the part, how long it takes them to queue it, how long it takes them to deliver it. And so what you're doing is you're setting it yourself up for not running out of parts, but you're able to reduce the amount of materials that you have in stock. And so that does many things for you. It frees up floor space, gives you a little bit better area to work in, and you're not piled up with boxes all over the place, trying, and feeling overwhelmed, quite honestly, if people just start pushing parts to you. Right. So there's tremendous value in a very simple Kanban.
So Steve, you just you walked us through it, and we started this whole, you just walked us through a little bit of a process for Kanban. We started this whole thing with this idea that, there are some people that can tout just the glories and majesty of Kanban, and there's others that, man, this is stupid. This sucks. I don't understand it. When you, let's go back to kind of weave the why into what are the main buckets if you're going to start with a new company or start a company on a new journey with they haven't used Kanban before. What are the main buckets to do so? Because you just mentioned some great things. It's not just about, oh, here's a card that says it's time to order. You also have to think about, what's the time it takes for this card to get to where it needs to go, to pull the part, to put it in queue, to get it to you, all of those things. So what are those main buckets, and what is the why you give to the employees that have to do this so that they have a better acceptance of, because you also said at the very beginning, we don't like to change. So if you're going to ask me to change, telling me the why is helpful. So what are kind of the high level buckets and the why to help our listeners understand, oh, I can see why this could be helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think starting off with, again, just the simple production Kanban, we want them to understand that we're going to design the system with a little bit of leeway in it so that they cannot possibly run out of stock. And I've been in some organizations that they almost freeze out of fear because they're used to having 20 totes full of parts by their workstation, and they only use 2 a day. I mean, and so people have a tendency to worry about that kind of thing. So again, what we do is we build fluff into the system and say, okay, you only use 2 a day. So if I put 4 here instead of 20, we've saved this much in inventory. Now, what happens is a lot of people on the floor don't really understand the cost of inventory. And so we go into a very fundamental inventory carrying cost and just say, okay, so for every one of these totes that you have here, that represents $20 cost to the company every month. And if you have 20 of them and you only use 2, that means 18 of them is costing the company, but it's not generating any profits. And so we help them to at least make a connection that, well, yeah, I don't want to run out of parts, but maybe it makes more sense. And people that have a tendency to hoard materials and spare parts and PLCs and things like that, they don't like Kanban. But I have seen where even in the maintenance area, when you put Kanban in the maintenance area, how you can have a significant savings across the board and still not impact availability of items when you need them. So a Kanban is a visual control. It provides me with an instruction when I need to order parts. I pull it off the tote, put it in the mail slot. The team lead normally picks up the Kanban cards and then gets them to the logistics group. The logistics groups goes through them, and on the Kanban card, there's a lot of information on the Kanban card, but basically it's going to say how many days between delivery, like it would be once a day or 4 times a day, and how long does it take me to process this? Because if it's an internal part that you're providing, the lead time may not be very long. When I worked with Toyota, we were stamping parts out that would be in finished vehicles a shift and a half later. So we didn't have a long time. And when we did inventory at other organizations that I've worked with, it might take you a week, 3 to 5 days to do a count inventory. At Toyota, we did it between day shift and second shift. So it took us an hour and a half to do a hard count inventory. And that just blew me away when I saw that. I mean, and that's all because of the ability to reduce stock so you don't have a lot of excess, because everything needs to be counted when you do a full count inventory.
Yeah, that's a great example. And just a personal reflection I had in the office environment, I had someone that was struggling to get their head around what we're asking them to introduce some Kanban out on the production area. But so, okay, well, let's take it for a spin in here and finding that 1 or 2 things that they did run out of in the office space and setting up just some simple little cards to help with so we don't stock out theoretically. And we took that for a walk. And when I was describing it to this person and I talked about working capital or that money just sitting there, making that visible, he said to me, yeah, it's kind of, yeah, we don't want to overdo it, do we? He said, it's kind of like as soon as I use 5 liters of fuel in my car, I don't go to the petrol station, fill it right up again. Like we said, if I know I've got a bit of a distance to go, he said, is it kind of like that? I don't sort of just keep filling it up for the sake of it. Just use what I need and make sure I don't run out, and sort of work out kilometers that in this amount of time I need to probably call in and all those sorts of things. And he said, I've got the fuel gauge where it says empty, and then I've got that little bit of time. So it was interesting finding that thing that was really grinding their gears, because from a cultural perspective, if we're asking them to do it out there, are you guys using it in here? And do you really connect with it? So it was a bit of fun with things around stationery and tea and coffee and sugar and all these sorts of things. So yeah, that was a great example and how people can connect, and visual again. So that's what I love. That's why it doesn't suck for me, because it's just like, it makes the working capital costs or the inventory costs visible. It makes I'm about to run out, or I don't need to go down there and top them up because I haven't received a signal yet. So, yeah.
Hello, everyone. I am sorry to interrupt this episode of the Lean Solutions podcast, but I wanted to take a moment to invite you to pick up a copy of my Shingo Award-winning book, Avoiding the Continuous Appearance Trap. In the book, I contrast the cultures of 2 companies I worked for. And though each started with similar lean models, one was mechanistic and only gave the appearance of lean, while the other developed a true culture of continuous improvement. The contrast provides a vivid example of the difference between fake lean and true lean. You can find the book on Amazon. Simply search my name or the title of the book. You aren't a reader? No worries. The audiobook is also available on Audible. Now, back to the show.
So I think that's, just something we talked about that amazing improvement example that you said with the $12 billion savings, right? Yeah. Or the other example in the smaller company was like 416%. Was there we were really trying to unpack and try and take some of the mystery out around where this can go wrong and why, as we said in the title, it sucks. But was there a common challenge and a little bit deeper than a cultural thing? Like, was there some specific things that jumped out in both those companies that you needed to be sensitive to pick up early, and how you kind of manage that?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is they have to feel comfortable with it. And the example when I said they had 20 totes by the machine, but he only did 2 a day. If I said we were only going to give you 2 a day, he would have probably had a heart attack. Okay. And so you want to count wins, and you need to get the cooperation and the cultural change in order to get those wins. So we agreed to do 4 totes at his workstation. And so he didn't worry about falling or running out of parts or having difficulty with that. And it was a significant savings in just that one machine. And just multiply that by the 130 some odd employees at that company that would have had potentially a similar situation where they had a lot of parts line side that didn't need to be there. One other thing I'd like to mention about Kanban, and I'm sure you all have heard this, when we had the whole issue around COVID and all the material shortages and toilet paper shortages and everything, well, everybody blamed Lean for it. And although everyone that was doing Lean still took time to recover, the people that were doing Lean and using Kanban and their suppliers using Kanban, they returned to productivity much quicker than organizations that did not use an inventory system like Kanban.
There was a lot of blame. It's like this just in time we've just proved that just in time is not. Yeah, I mean, it was once in a hopefully lifetime event, right?
Yeah.
Down here, the toilet paper thing, Peter, it wasn't that we didn't have enough. It was people just went crazy and just took way more than they needed because of that uncertainty about what may be happening next. So again, giving that clarity around what's your usual type of flow, and I'd forgotten about the toilet paper thing until you reminded me of that. It seems like such a time ago, but yeah, they did. As you said, they came back online a lot quicker than some others. So great example.
Steve, what have you suggested to companies that you've talked about Kanban in regard to how they can share this knowledge and this system with their suppliers? What are some suggestions? Hey, like I could do it, but how do I get Andy to understand how to do it? What's a good way to transition between what I'm doing here in my shop and my suppliers back there?
Yeah, and I think this goes to the issue of starting with leadership, because if I as an organization is being very successful with Kanban, I'm going to have some bottom line improvements that I can tout with leadership of other organizations, my suppliers, and I can say this saved us so many percent in inventory carrying costs, this saved us so much in floor space. So I can tout that to the leadership because the leadership needs to drive the cultural change, but it needs to be embraced by the line worker in order to thrive. And so if the leadership is willing to put manpower and necessary support to a lean initiative, it's going to go well as long as the hourly worker embrace it. And they need to say, okay, I don't understand why you're doing it. So I need to explain to them so that they do understand it. If you just say, do it, which was probably the management style up through the 50s, just do it. People want to know why. They want to understand the purpose of this, and is it value added? They may not use those terms, but they're going to be thinking, well, why am I doing this? This is extra work for me. But when you get down to it, it actually creates less work for you in the long run. But the change is sometimes painful for folks. And that's what we need to help them understand the value of it so that they'll be more likely to do it.
Sure, gotcha.
We touched on the unique events of the toilet paper thing, right? Are you comfortable to share an example of where you did some calculations with a manufacturer or a supplier involved, and you kept running out? Was there something that the calculation that you put in, or there was some other things, not such a global event like COVID, but has there been a tricky industry where you found it a little bit harder to get Kanban up and away than some others?
Yeah, well, I think that we had an instance where we had a company that did a lot of specialty work. And so they were basically doing one-offs.
Yeah.
Sure.
But it was all around a similar family, right? Okay. And so what we ended up doing there was working with their engineering group, and we went from 10,000 variations in their products, because that was basically one-offs for them. They'd build one or two of this, and then that they wouldn't see it for another year or two. But we worked with the engineering and talked about, okay, what can we commonize with all of these items, you know? And so when they found that they had like 5 or 6 things that could be made common on all of the units and allow them to do the variations, then we started to say, okay, now let's see if we can control these 5 or 6 items. And I mean, simple things like brackets and you know, bolts and things like that. It starts off small, but once they see the win, then they start seeing it from their perspective. And when I go in an organization, I always say, I don't have the answers. I really don't. You guys have the answers. And what I need to do is I need to help you understand Lean and the tools, and that's going to help you to identify what the answers are. And we coach them in projects that are actually applied to their workspace, and that's where they get that initiative for doing it on their own once we leave.
Thank you. Yeah, great example. And I guess, would you say it's another tool in the tool belt to help drive organizations towards standardization where they can, and make it a bit smoother? So appreciate that insight.
It makes me think the more we're talking to you, Steve, the more nuances and depth that you're adding to this idea of Kanban, because you can take it from a very high level. Kanban is just kind of a visual way of managing a process, or a supply, ordering supplies and those kind of things. But you keep pointing out these other little nuances that really help enhance the effectiveness of it. Similar, like your example right there. Hey, we have all these one-offs that we do, but there might be some commonalities that we can put a Kanban system in with those. Can we start creating everything just has, this kind of bracket at least, change, kind of get those common things. Or, the timing, understanding the timing. You mentioned that earlier. Are there any 1 or 2 other nuances that just kind of add to this richness that we can share, with our listeners in regards to the depth that Kanban can go, not complexity, but just like, hey, this just helps, just enhance it.
Yeah. What I usually encourage new Lean travelers is that they need to personalize it. And so I probably have only showed one client my Kanban calculation spreadsheet because it's scary looking at it. Okay. And so I don't want them to be scared, and what I usually do when I work with an organization is I work in Lean as a consultant, just like I work in Lean in manufacturing. And that is, you pull the information from me. Yeah. So when you ask me certain questions, I'm going to know that you're ready for that next step. You're ready for that next piece of information. And so I think with Kanban, like I said, I've seen some very complex Kanbans, and for our training system, I have very simple Kanban on the totes, and they're actually adhered to the totes. And the reason we do that is, if we were to have the pocket and pull the Kanban card out and put it in the slot and follow through with that process, it would cause us to go much longer in time for the training. And so we have classes that are just 1 day long, and it's impossible to do it. We have 3 and 3.5 day classes. We have week-long classes. It really depends upon what the customer needs are, but the Kanban are adhered, and we explain the process so that they understand this is abnormal. This is not typical Kanban. It's just like Kamishibai cards. We use Kamishibai cards, and we say, this is our normal, system, and this is the way we use it here. But when you use it, you need to personalize it. And so things like Kanban, Andy, you mentioned already about stationery and things. I have multiple pictures of stationery closets that have been Kanbaned.
Yeah.
And it does prevent you from running out of materials. And I will say, I don't do this, but I know of 3 people that have. They did a Kanban system on their pantry. And so they don't have to take inventory before they go to the store.
Yep.
And they buy only the cards that are in the Kanban slot. And so if a young member of the family says, hey, you didn't get Twinkies, okay, did you put the Kanban card in the box? No. Okay, well, if you put it in the box, I'll get it the next time I go to the store. Okay, so that's kind of a forcing the culture change within the young people. But and they said that they spend less money at the grocery store.
Yeah.
They never run out of things they want unless it's someone not following the system. And so, it's
Great
just amazing
example.
what you can do with it.
It is, and some of the smart fridges that are out there now. So 4 people now, because I don't like running out of tea, and I'm very careful what lean I bring into the home with my family. But the different types of tea, there's one there falling back from what I did at the previous place was when we get to this level for these tea bags, can't run out of Lady Grey. All right, it makes my world fall apart. So the other that's a terrific example. So I think what I'd really love to, so you talked about this pull system, right? Like we have a framework for these interviews, right? Mm-hmm. And pretty quickly we start to pop up additional questions. It's working now. What you're listening to is you're pulling some additional questions and things out of us as we go. So good job. The other thing I really wanted to tease out a little bit more, or pull more from you, is the Lean Environment Simulator. Okay, for me, some places that may be a bit hesitant to try Kanban somewhere, you've developed. Can you talk us through this environment simulator, how this has been established and what the purpose of that is all about?
Sure. Well, the Lean Simulator, you will not find at any Toyota plant. Just everybody thinks that it's from Toyota, but General Motors developed the Lean training system, and they call it a SWE, Simulated Work Environment. And when I worked with Caterpillar, they were installing 25 of these units globally. And at the time, GM had 44 of these units. And at the time, they were about $250,000 per unit. So it was a significant investment. And so this developed and was used to help workers in the plants have a chance to work in a lean environment and see how it's supposed to work. And so that would help them to feel a little bit more comfortable with what changes we may have needed to make on the floor. And so we typically establish a lean training system of some type in every organization, but it's usually around their product. So like a hybrid water heater would not build cabs like I build cabs. They would be building hybrid water heaters, and companies that do brake lines and do, gas tanks and things like that. It would be a simulation around their product line for 2 reasons. First of all, it would be more familiar and people would make the connection faster and easier, but it's usually cheaper for them to do it also because they always have some product that they may not be as proud of as others, and that could become part of the simulator and not worry about the blemishes and things like that, And so the simulation walks people through the beginning of the day where we do checks for safety, quality, cost, and 5S on their workstations. And they have the Kamishibai cards, and we call them K cards because who wants to say Kamishibai 100 times, right? So K cards, and they would follow that procedure. And if they came across an exception, they would get their team lead and say, okay, I can't mark this off because it's not safe or whatever the case may be. Then the team lead would then assist them in getting it to a safe condition before we did our first manufacturing round. And then as we did manufacturing, we would emphasize things like some locations have totes side by side that are the same part. With Kanban system, you pull all the parts from one tote at one time. You don't pull from 2 different totes because that would mess up your Kanban card delivery system, okay? And so they learn a little bit of a nuance there with it. They have all the materials they need to make their product, and the goal is 28 cabs in 30 minutes. The speed on the line is 1 minute. So they have the capacity to make 30 cabs in 30 minutes, but only about 5% of the classes ever get 28 cabs in 30 minutes. And so it's a challenge for them. 25, 26, 27, very, very frequent, but the 28, it seems like it's a hard target, but it's meant to be challenging. But we also do 5S. We use the boomerangs on the corner of all the movable racks and things like that. So they really get to see lean, how it should be in the plant. And we have a couple examples of things that do not have the corners on the floor like you would expect with items, but that's only for movable items. And I have come across some organizations that put those boomerangs around everything. Even if it's bolted to the floor, they still put it around it. And you don't need to do that. That's not the purpose of the corners. The purpose of it is to highlight where the home place is for it at the end of the shift, beginning of the shift. It could be all over the place during the workday, depending upon need, but that's its home location. And so Kanban's the same way. We have different systems here that we show them how we draw parts and how the parts are replenished. If a company does a lot of material handling, we have a material handler role that we can put in place here as part of the training. But most of our training is assembly and disassembly. We also have a quality gate at the end of the assembly process, and it has to be meeting expectations. Otherwise, it's not a first-time pass cab to the client. And so that's where they fall short of the 28 sometimes, where they might have, if they bump two cabs together, they're considered two scrap cabs. We can't issue them to the customer until after we put them in through utility. And so there's just an opportunity to feel lean, and our team leaders take on different personality types. In the first couple rounds, it's like, don't bother me. I'm drinking my coffee and eating my donuts kind of a thing. And in the next round, they're actively engaged. And if they pull their andon cord, they immediately respond. And in the last round, our team leads anticipate their needs. So there's a lot less activity on the andon because the team lead is taking that active role. And that's what the expectation is in lean organizations. So it's just a really neat way to learn stuff. I'm a very visual person. And so I tried to learn chess, and I read a couple books on it, and I was so confused I couldn't make heads or tail of it. I had a friend sit down with me with 30 minutes one day, and I was playing chess, you know? Yeah. And I think lean is very much like that. If you read the books on it, you can probably do it. It might take you 5 or 10 years to do it. But if you bring in someone who's knowledgeable and can guide you in the journey, it's going to take you less time to get to that level that you would take 5 or 10 years to get to. And you're going to realize all those savings for that longer period of time as well.
Yeah. And you've got so there's a period of time that you use that. And you also have a shorter version of that simulator available.
Yes. And the small version we call the mini lean environment simulator, and the cabs are about 2.5 foot by 2 foot and about 18 inches wide. And people are putting parts on the cabs. And so one of the things that I've provided is a link if people are interested in what the LESS looks like. It's a video that they can link to and look at it. It's the Global Great Lakes Show. I'm in Michigan, so that's kind of typical up there. We always talk about the Great Lakes and everything. And it's just something that they can see what it looks like. The mini version, we've installed 5 mini versions. We just started doing them a year and a half ago. And they're only about $50,000 in cost, but they give you some of the same abilities that you would with the full-size system. We replicated the full-size system in 2020 at an automotive plant in Detroit, and it was a $350,000 project. And so most companies are not going to spend that kind of money on a training system. Yeah. So, but the little system, we have them in a lot of schools, and it's just been very helpful for them to get their training.
I love a segue. So thanks, Steve, for a bit more detail on that. But Shayne, speaking of Michigan and an opportunity to experience less, I might throw to you, and you might want to fill our listeners in on and how they can come and see Steve and be part of it.
Yeah. So Steve, confirmed for me that or for our audience, that on September 24, 25, and 26, you will be available at the Lean Summit, the Lean Global Summit we have coming up with Lean Solutions.
Yes.
And with that, with your attendance there, are you able to the mini less?
Yes.
Like,
yes,
it's
the mini
even
less
smaller than less. It's a mini less.
Yes.
For people to now, will that be for people to actually engage in and go through the simulation, or is it just to give a visual to kind of walk by like, an exhibition booth?
Yeah, it's not going to be set up the way it normally would be, which is one closed loop manufacturing line where you assemble and disassemble. But what we will be doing is we'll be using that same principle, but we have 4 systems set up, and there'll be 4 teams of 10 people who are going to accept the challenge of coming up with the most efficient way of making product and having first quality delivery to the customer. So we'll be looking at the standard work. We'll be giving them some not so good standard work to start off with. And then they need to come up with the improvements that they want to make in order to it. And from what I understand, the afternoon of the last day of the summit is when they're going to have competition. And I assume that all 4 teams will be in the same area at the same time, and they're going to be pushing cabs out as best they can to meet the demand.
That's good. Whether you're involved in the challenge or whether you're going to be a bystander watching it, I'm very excited to have this as part of our Lean Summit. I think it's going to be a great augmentation to it for this upcoming year. So very excited. Thank you so much. So where can where can people find more? You mentioned that you sent us a link to a video of the LES. So we'll put that in some of the show notes when it's posted, when we post the podcast. But where else can people find more information about you or be able to connect with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and it's my full first name, Stephen, with a PH, STEPHENJ, and the last name Ansuini. And so if you look me up, I always look forward to connecting with new people, like-minded, and many phone calls and even some face-to-face meetings. It's always been neat. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Steve. We really appreciate the time you've given us here. The content that we have, the way you've been able to kind of tease out Kanban, giving it a little more favorable look, especially when you're talking about, the possibility of it being able to contribute to $12 billion in savings, or 19%.
419% net profit increase in 3 years.
Right. Increase, so Kanban, yes, it may suck out there, but it could also be something, as was eloquently put, a finely tuned symphony of orchestrating productivity.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate it, Steve, what you've given us here today. Thanks so much. Andy, what you got? Wrap us up.
Look, Steve, I can't wait to meet up with you in person in Michigan in September. And I think anyone who's listened to this recording would be inspired to reach out. You've got such a wealth of experience and real lived examples of where you can supercharge your learning in your organization. So
thank you.
Same as Shayne, thank you so much for your time, Steve. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and I look forward to catching up with you in the very near future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. You all have a good day.
Right.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe. This way you'll get updates as new episodes become available. If you feel so inclined, please give us a review. Thank you so much.